Hey everybody, good morning and welcome, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's John Michael Salvato, and in many cultures and traditions, the end of what was considered at one time the 8th month in the Roman calendar, literally October in Old English, marked the beginning of a period in which we would give special attention, mindfulness or devotion to the ancestors of blood, the ancestors of place, of tribe, and of tradition. And so many of our viewers are already familiar with the Celtic celebration of Samhain, the modern Halloween, the medieval festival of shadows, and so many other traditions that happen around this time. But on today's show, I'm really excited because we're going to be talking to two very special guests about the concept of working with the ancestors and the old ones more generally as part of our daily practice, as well as hearing what inspired them to begin an incredible podcast and video broadcast that explores some of the intersectionality, the diversity and the mystery of spiritual traditions that make up our society and our world. More on that when we come back. Hello, everybody, and let me see. I'm not seeing Teresa's camera there. Teresa, you may have frozen, so jump out and come back in, and I'll let you back in. But good morning, Andrea, my co-host.
Good morning, everyone.
And
good morning.
One of our special guests, Jean-Jerome Baudry, and Teresa Sliwinski will be with us, I'm sure, in just a moment. This is one of those times when it's challenging for me to be able to chew gum and talk at the same time. So we'll keep an eye out. But while we're waiting for Teresa to get back, let me just say thank you for tuning in. This is a live broadcast, which means that your participation, your comments, your questions for our guests and for us. There's Teresa. So welcome, Teresa.
Hi.
And we thank you for liking and subscribing and sharing this if there's somebody that you think that our broadcast will particularly vibe with. So thank you in advance for that. And if you're watching from one of the private groups, remember you have to click that little Facebook link that says I give Facebook permission to put my name on the screen. If you're watching from YouTube or you're watching from an open Facebook group or page, then we can actually see who you are. So when you ask questions, we can put them up on the screen and share those. So with that, let me go ahead and dive in because we have a really packed show for you today. I'm really excited because our guests today are somebody that I personally vibe with, that I personally respect, and really would love to hear more of their story, having been on their show before. It was the hardest thing for me to be on anyone else's show, to be interviewed anywhere, is not to get back in the interviewer mode and start the questions. So, Awo ni Oromia Ifa Lodon, which I probably just completely slaughtered, also known as Jean-Jerome Baudry, has studied in the Yorùbá, Ifa, Orisha belief system for most of his life. He's the son of Lydia Gonzalez Uguay, the field researcher of the respected ethnologist and late musicologist, author of La Casa Templo en Regla de Ocha, Don Fernando Ortiz Fernandez. And he is also the co-founder and president of the Consejo Cultural Yorùbá de Canada, and has been in Awo for 10 years. and he practices Ifa in Toronto, Canada. In 2019, Jean-Jerome was initiated into the Ogboni Society as an apena, and for the last 7 years has been involved in collaborative research with other priests and ministers in different lineages and schools and ethnicities, leading to research and collaboration and publishing of articles and books for the use of fellow priests in Ifa and Fa. Jean-Jerome has also presented and taught on the topic of Ifa and Orisha at York University in Toronto during a 2-year collaboration with the Harriet Tubman Institute for a spiritual belief system series. And I apologize in advance for all of the mispronunciations.
No worries, no worries.
I'm sure we're more numerous than the stars in the sky. And Andrea, I will let you take over with Teresa's bio.
Wonderful. So please welcome also Teresa Sliwinski, who is the crone and the Baba Yaga of her own Facebook page, The Slavic Witch, and is administrator and moderator for Polish and Slavic Paganism Group. She has an intuitive gift that she shares with others, both living and those in spirit, and she loves what she does and those she connects with. Her lifelong journey has been through experiences and study in all paths that Spirit has brought her through, and learning and studying multiple religious and spiritual beliefs that include traditional witchcraft, Wicca, shamanism, Catholic conjure, and African traditional, as well as the study of psycho-spiritualism, mediumship training, angel guides, and spiritual healing modalities. She was also part of a team of paranormal investigators and has done house cleanings and home blessings. And these unique studies and experiences introduced her to other cultures and people and helped her shape her own path, but were also integral in developing her natural born psychic gifts and honing her craft as the crone.
So guys, thank you so much for both being here today. And your show, as we jump in, let's start off by talking a little bit about what brought you onto your personal spiritual journey, your personal path, and then we're going to talk about your program a little bit and what led you to actually creating that space for everybody, which, as I said, I'm a huge fan of.
As am I.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You've been on the show. So I would love to hear a little bit about, we'll start with Teresa. Tell us about your journey to your path.
Well, it started with my gifts as a young child, my intuitive gifts that ended up needing some sort of guidance. So I set off on this journey. And as I set off on this journey, I met some very interesting people. I was very drawn to the occult because I felt that my gifts were a part of this intuitiveness that I needed to develop. So I came into contact with some Wiccans, to some traditional witchcraft people. And also shamanism was something that I was very interested in as well. I had a friend who, my friend Brenda McIntyre, medicine song woman, who I used to drum with. But it was something that happened to me personally that led me to the African traditional religions. It was my experience in Cuba many, many years ago in 1993. And it kind of stuck with me. And like they say, spirits, they choose you, right? So they chose me, and I kind of lived with them for a while, and being very cognizant of the fact of not trying to culturally appropriate, I thought, okay, well, they're more than welcome to be with me, but, I don't really, resonate with that right now. Well, as it turned out, that's how I met Jean-Jerome. It was actually a spiritual near crisis for me. I started with, I was introduced to someone in the Santeria community who helped me. And from there, I thought everything was fine until wasn't, and then I met Jean-Jerome. And so Jean-Jerome thankfully helped me, and that's how I came onto the path of Ifa, was actually through Jean-Jerome, and here I am.
Right on.
That's great.
And you're also very, very connected to your cultural heritage as a Slavic witch, and are doing remarkable work in helping people to understand the intersectionality there. That I really think it just is such an important moment for us as a spiritual community, as a metaphysical community overall, at a time when lines are being drawn in the sands everywhere, to say, hey, if we dig back deeply enough, all for it was easy for me, I think, as an Italian and Sicilian, to say, all paths lead back to Africa. That was easy, because that's not that big of a stretch geographically. But if you look at some of the Slavic culture, and you look at some of the Asian cultures, we start to see these intersectionalities that beg us to say, we really do have common ancestors here, and it's time that we start erasing these lines in the sand and fill that space with gratitude. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Jean-Jerome, tell us a little bit about your journey and your path.
Oof, okay, that's a long story. So I had the privilege of being born to one of the most exceptional women that I've ever had the privilege of meeting. My mother, Lydia Adolfina González Ugay. My mother was a career diplomat and in Cuba before the revolution. And when the revolution took hold in Cuba, my mom was given a choice to either sign something called the Declaration of Havana, which basically said there's no God, there's no spirits, there's only the Communist Party, or basically resign her post. So she resigned her post, and she was commissioned by UNESCO to work with Don Fernando Ortiz to actually do a linguistic and religious map of the Afro-descendant religions in Cuba, which included Regla de Ocha, or Risha worship, Ifa, and Palo in Kisi, as well as Abakwa. And she worked and collected information. She interviewed some practitioners that were direct descendants of Yorùbá, direct descendants of Congo, and they basically compiled this archive in the Academy of Sciences in Cuba. And through that, she met my dad, who actually had traveled to Cuba for the French government, and basically had been invited to a religious ceremony of Nkisi, and he had heard them speaking Kikongo. And my father speaks 11 languages, and he had been in Africa for 3 years in the Congo region with the French airborne. So he was curious, a bit of a linguist. He said, I wonder who's studying these religions and these belief systems in Cuba. And they met on October the 4th at the Academy of Sciences. And a year later, they got married. And basically, from all my life, I grew up in the Afro-descendant belief systems of Cuba, learning to respect, and with a mother which had a great gift of sight, ability to see the past, present, future. I saw many wonderful things. Later on in my life, about now, it's going to be 10 years, I was in it this weekend, actually, on October 31st, November 1st, is when I entered into Igbodu and was initiated into Ifa as a Babalao. So for me, the veil is a bit thinner at that time, because that's actually when I became a Babalao. But, and as I said, I've been practicing here in Canada, with the community, working with Babalaos from both the Afro-African traditional religion, Yoruba traditional, as well as Afro-Cuban descendant. I've traveled, had the privilege of working with Babalaos both here in Canada, but also traveling to the States and Europe. And we basically are very interested in promoting and making sure that people understand the Afro-descendant religions, especially Ifa and Risha, to dispel a lot of myths and Hollywood, sort of legends and misinformation, which in many areas of the world can cause great deal of discrimination, violence, and fear. Especially, I give an example in Brazil, in the Candomblé community, the abuse from evangelical groups, it almost took them to the United Nations as an appeal for their protection from retributions, destruction of their religious icons, and everything else. A lot of fear and lack of understanding. So I've been very vocal, and actually my Oduvifa, Osheyeku, is a sign of Awishe, of representation, of speaking on behalf and defending the belief system wherever and whenever possible.
Right on, and I'm so I'm so fanboying right now because I listen to the work that you do. But Andrea, I want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions about their backgrounds first before we jump into their work, because this show could easily go 2 hours.
I know. Well, one of the things that I just really drew me to the show was, and I don't, well, as far as backgrounds go, I think what I immediately felt watching it was this grand openness to really hearing what other people were saying about cultures that have been misrepresented in so many kind of outer commercializations. And so for me, being able to listen to both of your stories, and then it makes perfect sense how you receive everyone into your life in that same way. Like there's just such a community and generousness that I perceive with both of you when you're speaking about other cultures. So yeah, I would love to hear more about what practices maybe connected the two of you together, or how that sort of became, like, how did it become your show, basically? How did the two of you decide to, now that you had this personal relationship, how did that become something where it became a voice for so many others?
Well, I'm just going to start it off, but I'm going to give it then to Teresa. But the reason I started off is I want to acknowledge the reason that Teresa and I know each other is because of the Iami. And it was the Iami that brought us together. It was the Iami that presented themselves to Teresa and said, you need to seek help and you need to seek knowledge or information about who we really are. Awesome. And it was through that and through our friend Beth that Teresa and I met. I had the privilege of meeting Teresa. And really through that journey, it is really, and even to the beginning of the show, and Teresa will tell you about how the genesis of the show, I must pay homage to Onile Obodura, Mother Earth, Onile, and to the Iami, Oshoronga. That is really what brought us, and Ifa, which as always speaks and helps to translate the words and messages and information of the divinities. And that's how we met. So over to you, Teresa.
Thank you. Wow. Yes. No, exactly. And that's so succinctly, you brought that forward. Yes, it really came down to when I had met Jean-Jerome, and the whole premise of me coming into Ifa was because of the Iami, and the Iami being the descendant witches. Okay. They are the ancestral witches of which I am a part of. So now, being Jean-Jerome's medium, amongst others, there was a dream. And with this dream, every time I have a dream, it's always, I call up Jean-Jerome and I said, okay, I had this dream, right? So he's just like, stop, whatever, and goes, okay, so tell me more, right? And it just so happened that this was in correlation to what he was doing with another Babalao. So he had me come on to the meeting with the other Babalao, and I had told him what I had seen. I had seen a web, a spider's web. And within the spider web, I had seen other religions all speaking and talking to one another. I saw a rabbi in that part of the web. I saw a Buddhist over here. I saw witches over there. I've seen Catholic priests, and it was just a myriad of all these religious groups. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And of course, Jean-Jerome was in the dream, hence my calling him. But it kind of sort of expanded from that dream. And so when he had brought me into this meeting with the other Babalao, and I had explained what was going on, he sort of went, into a little bit more detail of what was happening at that moment. And then it wasn't that long after, I think, Jean-Jerome, when you called me up and said, listen, I have an idea, right? And I said, yeah, okay. I think it's wonderful, because Jean-Jerome actually started a show originally with, I think it was Beth at York University.
Yeah. And with Danielle Bocono Dafoji, we did several with Ianifa or Moko Ade
Yeah.
in California as well. Yeah.
Right. And so you started the show, and I remember tuning in because there were a couple of online shows that you had presented, and so I had tuned into those. But anyway, so this is how the show sort of presented itself, and it kind of went from there. And so when we were looking for, also, I had a consecutive dream when we were looking for like a logo or something. Immediately the EME come to my dreams, and they said it has to be a spider. And that spider has a link to me because years ago, I actually got bit by a black widow spider and had a near-death experience. So through that, our logo that you see, that black widow spider, is because of the dream I had and what the EME had wanted. So as I presented that to Jean-Jerome, he took it from there. I took the idea to a artist friend of mine who lives out in Canada, in Alberta, and my friend Bo actually came up with the design. And so that's how this show was actually born. And I said to Jean-Jerome, at the time when we were having that meeting, I said, we really need to open up. We need to talk to other religions instead of just all being so secular and attacking one another, or miscommunicating things that we think we understand that we really don't. And so when this show birthed itself, I had a list of I have very interesting friends, and so does Jean-Jerome. And I said, now this gives us an opportunity to bring so-and-so on, so-and-so, and this. And it just kind of, it went from there. And that's how the show really came about. But it's funny because I remember doing something similar when it came to the pagan pub moots, which became very popular in the late 90s, early 2000. I was part of a coven that started that in Toronto, and it sort of blossomed from there. And then there were pub moots all over the place. And I don't know if we started the trend in North America, but yeah, again, that spider web.
I love that. I did not know that story. So that was one of my questions I was going to ask. And Andre asked one of my other. For luckily, I have 600 others. So that was a beautiful way of tying us into the next big question. So you've created this space, this sacred space, this show, podcast, video cast, and one of the most impressive things for me is to be able to witness people from so many different traditions coming on. And as with anything in human nature, different traditions are not going to agree on everything. And yet you created a space in which those differences can be discussed in a respectful way. They can be discussed in a way that's meaningful, that really honors that person's path. At times, hearing some of the folks on the show, I have been so inspired because there have been people that we've not had on our show because we know that some of their ideas may really tangentially go off in a direction that's not consistent with who we are. And so I've learned from watching your show a different way of maybe approaching that, where there can be space for somebody to say something that because we don't control what one another says. Somebody could say something that's really wackadoodle and just contradicts everything that we know historically, anthropologically. Right. And yet we can still say, hey, you know what? If that is your story, then your story is sacred to me. And I don't have to agree with the history. I don't have to agree with anything else, but I have to honor the fact that it's important to you. And so I thank you for that. But you've kind of talked a little bit about why you do what you do, but I wonder if you could just kind of expand, either one of you, on sort of the vision for what you're doing. You're now on your 27th or 28th episode, I believe.
That's right.
And you have had everyone from druids to scholars in Italian witchcraft and folk magic, to members of the Freemasonry, high-ranking members, I should say, really discussing their tradition but through it all, you masterfully weave in the presence of what in our tradition we refer to as the old ones, the oldest of our ancestors, in a way that just has me addicted. I mean, there's no way I can't always watch. Friday nights are not a good night for me to watch live, but I find myself on some nights, particularly this past week, when our brother Chris was on your show, and we had guests here at the house. I, casually picked up my phone and went in the bathroom, shut the door, and watched it live. So tell us a little bit about where the vision is for that show. Then we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the ancestors.
Well, Jean-Jerome, go ahead.
The idea of Ancestral Eyes, why Ancestral Eyes, is that, again, as part of the research and also my own spiritual journey in the last few years after becoming a Babalao, being initiated, I did a lot of work and with Bokono Dafoji, Daniel Barreiro, in Uruguay. He was initiated in Abomey as a Bokono, but he has been working with his ancestral spiritual guide, basically what they call Joto, for almost 40-something years. And the idea is that, and in Cuban, in Espiritismo, in Cuba, at the basis of a lot of the belief systems in Cuba, which is the article I published from Owen Ballard, which is sometimes is underrated or under mentioned. But at the end of the day, and my mom used to say this when she was alive, my son, you can receive any power in the world, any initiation, but you must always first ask permission and the blessing of Almighty God, Olodumare, Mau, Edumare, whatever name you want to give him, and your ancestral spiritual guide, your guía espiritual. And there is a belief, a pervasive belief, that all of us in Vodun Fa, even in Ifa Orisa, but a little bit hidden with the concept of Obaegu, that there is the presence of a spirit which has had many lives before, usually comes not consanguineous, that was not from your bloodline, but who is like a returned master, a returned elder or sage. And it is that guide's mission, together with your own Odi or destiny, to accomplish a sacred mission in this life. And throughout all these different belief systems, we found, whether it be Tuvan shamanism, Sangoma, witchcraft, witch doctor, you name it, there is always a pervasive guide, one guide which is responsible and comes through, one sacred mission which basically propels everything else that you do. And if he accepts the practices you do, everything goes fine. If he doesn't accept the practices you do, it could be a disaster. Whether you go into Ifa, whether you go to Palo, if your ancestral spiritual guide was not of that culture or did not, basically believe in the tenets or the principles of what you practice, it's a disaster. And that's one of the reasons. That's why we said in our show, life is the journey our ancestors began. But it's not just, and this is something we've gone on many shows and published many articles. These guides are not always our direct blood relatives. These are ancestral spiritual guides that have chosen us, and our OD has chosen them in a sacred contract or basically agreement to accomplish a mission on earth for the benefit of the community, the family, humanity. So that's really the essence of the show. The heart of the show is that ancestral. That's why we say in Yorùbá, Iku lobi ocha. Iku, death, and the ancestor is what gives birth to the Orisha and everything else.
Andrea, you're going to ask something.
Oh no, I was just going to say that it really comes through the sense of community when we watch your show. I mean, that's the first thing that I really felt watching it was this that ancestral openness and depth that you don't often see, I think, as much as we need to right now. So I felt, it's very powerful what you're doing. It's incredibly powerful.
Thank you.
And healing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Teresa, you want to add anything to that before we go to break?
No, I agree with everything that Jean-Jerome said, and that was the thing that really sort of made itself very clear to me. Like I said, when I had started my journey and I came up to a certain point where I had some spiritual difficulties, obviously my Johto needed me to get back on the horse, so to speak. That's when I came to Jean-Jerome. And again, as I said, culturally misappropriating African, spirits. Like, what do they want with me? I mean, I'm a white girl. I'm a Polish white girl. What the hell do they want with me? Well, it's that historical background and my research into my own ancestral roots that I found so much information there and brought me to where I was, to where I am now. And it all has to do with ancestors. And like Jean-Jerome said, they're not necessarily of blood. Some are, like in my court, so to speak, because I am a medium, and I have all sorts of spirits that follow me, and they help me to, go through life. And now I know that, right? I wasn't listening before. I was being stubborn. Right? That's being human, right?
I think that's so important.
Yeah.
And so awesome. And I don't mean to like put you in the hot seat where you have to follow these incredible discussions and add to it, but every time you deliver. So thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and take a very brief break to talk about something that lies, I think, at the core, at the heart of what we talk about on our show and what Jean-Jerome and Teresa talk about on their show. And that is the central mission of an organization known as the Charter for Compassion. So when we come back, we're going to be talking more about the ancestors, about this time of year, and about how we weave in the mission of this desire to see compassion at the heart of our morality, the center of our morality. More on that when we come back.
Hi, I'm Adrian Grenier, and I'm a guy you might know. That's why I've chosen to speak to you today, because you know my story. Well, some of it anyway. But what if you knew everyone's story? What if everyone on the planet was familiar to everyone else? The Charter for Compassion wants to find out. They're asking you to tell them a piece of your story. One moment of compassion that changed your life. Each story will be inspiring in its own right, but all of them together will reveal a world of compassion happening right now in places all over the world, as diverse as Kentucky all the way to Pakistan and everywhere in between. Imagine it. Thousands of stories told one person at a time. Someone once said, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard his or her story. Stories make us care. Stories help us understand. Stories breed compassion. And if there's one thing we need right now, in our politics, in our dialogue, in our communities, in our world, it's compassion. Go to charterforcompassion.org and tell your story. And while you're there, affirm the Charter and make a commitment to make the world a more compassionate place. But it's only the first step. Now it's time to practice. It's the only way to a peaceful world. I can't wait to hear your story.
And we're back. You're watching The Masca and the Mystic. With me, my co-host, Andrea Savar, and our special guests today, Teresa Sliwinski and Jean-Jerome Baudry, with whom we are sharing an incredible conversation about what you just heard in that little public service announcement about this need to make compassion a central and luminous part of at the center of our morality, at the focal point of who we are as spiritual practitioners. So guys, thank you. And if you're watching, folks, we encourage you to comment or ask questions. This would be the time. I put my glasses back on so I can actually watch the comments. And let's kick this off, I think, by talking about some things that we've been talking about in recent weeks in my class. We've been talking about on the show, and that is that this is a time of year when many traditions say that the veil is thin. And then other traditions say, oh, well, not necessarily, that's a human construct. And so on today's show, I wanted to again say what you've heard me say time and time again, and that is that two things can be true at the same time. So where our intention goes, so too does the energy go, and that is how we create the shifts in our world that manifest as our reality. And so if your attention goes to this moment, and we say in this moment the veil is thin, we're creating a liminal space. And so does that mean that come November 8th or 9th, the veil closes and then you got to wait, like registering for healthcare or voting? No, but it means that we have an opportunity right now, because so many people's awareness, so many people's focus, their energy is on creating a liminal space. We now have partnerships, we have allies on the physical plane, as well as our allies in the spiritual world, who are helping to make this an even more powerful time for us. And I saw something on your Facebook wall this morning, Jean-Jerome, that just was another one of those moments when the old ones affirm for us that we're going in the right direction. It was something I wanted to talk about that we've spoken about for this past week, and that is that ancestral work, as you said, and when we talk about ancestral work, we're not just talking about the ancestors of blood, but the ancestors of place, the ancestors of tribe, the ancestors of this moment. Is not always neat and clean, and it's not just about I have the pretty little altar and there's grandma's locket and there's my my statue or morti of so and so. But ancestral work can be messy, but in that messiness, there's such an incredible opportunity. Would you mind starting us off by speaking to that?
Myself or Teresa? Which one do you want to go first?
Yeah, we'll go with you first. Okay. I'm going to stop making it harder on Teresa to follow. First, I'm going to make it hard on you next time because I'll make you follow Teresa.
No.
It's okay. I don't find it hard.
No. So basically, for anybody who practices Ifa, Risa, we work with the spirits and the veil all the time. I mean, we're constantly having to do ceremonies that deal with the spirit world, different divinities and spiritualities that have to do with death and the afterlife, the other world. So for a Yoruba Risa, like this time of year doesn't have really it doesn't resonate as being a special time. The Yoruba follow a 4-day calendar in their rituals, which each day of those 4 days is a propitious based on their calendar in terms of venerating or making offerings to particular groups of Orisha. There's days of Ifa and Eshu, there's days of Shango and other Orisha, there's days of the Iyamis, etc. So based on that sort of constantly changing calendar, pretty much throughout the year, we're constantly working. And I can't say that from an Orisha perspective, West African Orisha or Evodu perspective, that this time of year has any more special influence or anything else than any other time of the year. However, in other traditions, and if you look at, for instance, if we look at Mexico, El Dia de los Muertos, right, because of association with the Catholic Church, the All Saints Day and the day dedicated to all the dead, because based on a comment you made, Jamaica, about when you put your intention, when millions of people put their intention into something and set a date and a time, it has power. And if you have generation after generation, hundreds of years that people have venerated, that were used to a certain time, they create that energy space, they create that affinity. And if you have ancestor in your cuadro espiritual, in other words, in terms of the spirits that accompany you, that have practiced those traditions, that respected those traditions, it will have meaning and power for you, right? An interesting story with myself, when I was they were choosing a date for initiation of Ifa, We had originally said July, then August, then September, and it fell on October 31st is when I went into Igbo Doom. All right. So, when you look at something like that, in my particular case, because of my ancestral and also genetic makeup, I have a very broad. I have Spanish, Portuguese, English, Wales, Congo, Nigeria, Togo, Basque, Germanic, French. So I have, from those different ties, those energies, those different backgrounds resonate with many spirits in my entourage. For me, it had power and meaning, right? But again, as you said, it's never convenient. Things don't happen on a convenient, sort of Hollywoodish. Oh, it's this time, this time. Sometimes, quite often, when something needs to be done, I've done it bows or had to do ceremonies, and we get a delay, and then, unbeknownst to us at that moment, it turns out that the offering we're making is on a full moon of a particular type and a certain power. And that, for West African religion, again, a bit lost in the Nigerian tradition, but still very much alive in the Vodou in Benin, among the Fonwe and the Ewe. It is still very much that they look at astronomical and astrological events as being the propitious for doing certain types of ceremonies, giving certain types of initiations, or birthing certain types of spiritual powers of nature.
We've got a comment here. It is a long one, guys. I'm going to ask you when you ask a question, if you can make it a little shorter so that we don't cut off our guests. But our dear friend Annette says, I've loved this conversation around the veil and how our perception is key. I've also felt that as a human who is an extrovert, I personally feel the need to have community and camaraderie in my life and my practice at times, and especially when I was starting out in the 90s on this path, having a time of year where so many other earth-centric spiritual cultures and traditions focus on this time, when no one is breaking away from the establishment, or when one is breaking away from the establishment and the mother church. The feeling is and then it got cut off. So that's why we have to, I appreciate that and really agree. I think we'll let our guests speak to that, but agree with you, Annette, that is one of the important things. We'll have to wait until after the show to see what the rest of the comments are, because I don't multitask multiple browser windows very well at all. And somebody else said here, thank you, Jean-Jerome, for speaking on ancestral guides that are not directly in our lineage. And Annette, there is nothing to apologize for. I adore you. So even if you do put seafood in your pasta sauce. Do you have a question, or are we going to turn?
I wanted to hear from Teresa about her experience with the veil, because we talked a little before the show, and also, in her traditions, how that lines up.
Okay, so I can relate to those other earth-based religions because obviously I have walked the path of British traditional witchcraft and Wicca. So their focus is at this time of year, which is Samhain, and that is when they connect with their ancestors, okay? And so being of that path, or having walked down that path, I understood what that was. And strangely enough, even though Jean-Jerome and I have butted heads on this, I have noticed that there is a thinning of the veils at this time of year. I had my own personal experience from where I had lived in the city. I live up north now. In my neighborhood, there were a lot of spirits. It's one of the old historical parts of Toronto. And as I came to know, there was a huge explosion at one time. So there were a lot of spirits that had, sort of walked the earth at that time of year. Now, it just so happened that this one year, it was around Samhain. I had a few friends over at my house, and it was a very private little ceremony. It was just a few girls. And I had to take the dogs out for a walk. So as I went through the neighborhood, I started noticing there were little things like, I thought I saw a cigarette, on someone's porch, someone having a cigarette. But as I got closer, there wasn't really anyone there. And I thought, there's a spirit, there's an ancestor. And it just kind of progressed as I got back home. I could see more and more of these spirits, right? So I thought, you know what, I'll give it that, all right? But coming from my own ancestral background, and I'm talking about being a Slav, we observe our ancestors throughout the entire year. The only time we don't is, of course, winter. It's a hiatus. I think it's after like November, mid-November or something, that's everything kind of stops and we have our own private observance to our ancestors. We have our own little, what I'm going to refer to as a boveda in the corner of the house where we pay homage to our ancestors. And these are our blood ancestors, okay? Now, having said that, throughout the year, Slavs celebrate. They celebrate this time of year. There's the Jatki or the Dushki, which is, again, the influence of Catholicism, is the observance of our ancestors as All Souls Night, okay? Sort of like a Night of the Dead as well. But we have observances in the spring, because as soon as spring hits, out we go into the cemeteries, cleaning off the grave sites, sitting down and breaking bread with our ancestors. That's the difference that I've noticed from North American cultures. And as I had come to know, this is what people in Mexico do. So we actually take food. We have a picnic in our grave sites to celebrate with our ancestors. So spring is dedicated to that. There's certain days that are set for that. And then there's a bit of a break. And then again, in May, June, all the way through, the summer months, there are observances. And of course, you can go at any time to go and converse with your ancestor, break bread, so to speak, right? So that's what I've noticed. And when Jean-Jerome had come one time and we were talking about this, and he goes, oh, well, it's the thinning of the veils and everything. I'm like, malarkey, No, you know what? Like you said, Gian Michael, you allow that space, it will happen. Does it happen? Of course it does. All right. So I do believe in the thinning of the veils, but I believe that they happen whenever. Okay. That's my take on it.
I've got a sort of a spin-off on what we were just talking about that I think this is a good transition for that, because taking into consideration, excuse me, what Annette just said about how helpful it is to have sort of that community around you at this time of year, and then a conversation we started a little bit earlier, it occurs to me that one of the benefits to bringing our awareness to this particular time, to creating liminal space at this time of year, is that ancestral work is not always neat and clean and pretty, and I would say that it is always beautiful, but it's messy. So having a community around you during a time when, as in the post that Jean-Jerome posted earlier, where he said, there might be that ancestor, that grandparent, or that uncle or aunt or whatever, who was inappropriate with you in whatever form. So that doesn't mean that at this time of year we run to them with open arms and put ourselves back in harm's way, because let's face it, the mythology that some people have created that, when you cross over, you suddenly have all awareness of all things and you're now a perfect being. No, assholes from this life are quite frequently assholes in the next life, and the energies and the lessons that they have to learn and the baggage that they brought with them is still going to be with them until they let it go. But in that is really the opportunity for us to do what for me personally, I'm not speaking for anyone else, but for me personally, is part of the mission of why I walk the spiritual path, and that is to do the healing work for my ancestors. It's both a responsibility and a privilege to be able to do that, just as I know that by setting this stage and kind of creating this space in future generations, there will be those who look at my legacy and say, here's an opportunity to do healing work for him and all of his baggage and all of his bullshit. So we're kind of at the same time paying it backward and paying it forward. I wonder what the three of you have to to add to that.
I think for me, for the way that my family worked, especially on the Italian side, goes back to this particular time of year in the Northern Hemisphere. We have that dying away of all of the plants. And so we are working very hard to make sure that the ones that are intended to come back in the spring do. And part of that is breaking different roots to propagate the different plants and getting in there, getting into the earth this time of year before it freezes and pulling out the bindweed and pulling out the things that hinder our progress of life is a big part of that. And I feel like that has always been, in the way we looked at it, a physical illustration or an outward illustration with our plant ancestors that help us in that realization of doing the hard work with healing the ancestors that came before us. And we do that in the physical way when we break apart the root and get our hands in the dirt and move everything that needs to be revitalized or protected for winter. But it just goes back to when we're doing it in the spiritual work, taking away the bindweed, taking away the things that have kept us in a certain rigidity of thought or that have kept us from healing.
I say.
Okay. That's right.
Absolutely. I liked what you had to say, Andrea, with regards to breaking the roots apart, right? And that's exactly what you do at this time of year. You prepare for the winter. And I know with our ancestors, not only was it the root work and everything, but it was also the culling of animals, because this is the time of year we had to stock up for the winter. So you had to, call the herd, so to speak, so that you had meat for the winter, because come Christmas, this was a big celebration, right? And you already had to have that in place. It's not right then and there that you're going to, kill the animal for the feast. It's already been done and prepared. And of course, there's all ceremony involved with all of that, right? So that's something that we have to be aware of too. And that's part of that getting in touch with our roots, so to speak, is acknowledging that. It's messy work, all right? But again, and I like what you had to say, Gian-Michael, with regards to you have ancestors that you're not proud of, okay, or ancestors that were difficult. And yes, I agree. They don't suddenly become little angels and grow wings when they get onto the other side. They're not. They're messy, and they will mess with you if you allow them to. But I think honoring them by following the traditions, personally, that's how I look at it. Following the traditions, acknowledging them is the most important, and being able to heal that part of yourself that you recognize within them and what it was that, that shadow side. And that's important. And this time of year is going into the shadows. When you think about it, the light of day gets less. I know up here, like 5 o'clock, I get up. When I used to be a school bus driver, I used to get up at 5, go to work. 5 o'clock, it was dark again, so you live more in darkness. This is the time of year you start to go inward and focus on yourself and focus on the things you need to do, right? And I know Jean-Jerome, having clientele that come that are perplexed with things that are going on in their lives. I don't know about you, Jean-Jerome, but is this time of year a lot more prevalent,
And the funny thing, I got to use steal a quote from a show that was airing for a while. It's called CSI Miami. And they say, we never close. So my fellow Babalaos, because there are not too many of us here in Canada, especially working throughout the year. Some come in and come out or go to warmer climates, especially in the winter here. But I've been known as Babalao Sub-Zero. I've done EPBOs and all people's situations. You can get like a doctor, right? Like Ifa practice is like a natural doctor, right? Essentially, you cannot. There's no, as you say, John, there's no convenient time or nice time of the year where you have to deal with certain situations. For us, for a Babalao, Ifa never sleeps. Ifa always says that Babalao always has something to do. So we follow sometimes a different rule because of that obligation or that circumstance. I've done ceremonies at any time of the year under circumstance. However, in Canada, of course, we have to be very creative because when the ground freezes and it's 30 below out, that's why thankfully we're born in a time where there's electric heaters and other things you can do in order to get around those problems. But again, spirit, the biggest thing is the spirits don't follow our calendar. The spirits don't follow our watch, right? Whether it be when a particular ebbo or sacrifice will become manifest, whether it be when somebody will attain that which they have put their intention for, and Ifa doesn't say, okay, well, at 3:45 p.m. on Friday, October 31st, you're gonna get it. It doesn't work that way. Orisha time, Ifa time is timeless. There's a theory of relativity there, right? So what is seems like months and days and year for the Orisha time is like yesterday. The difference is that when it happens, and when spirit is really present, and when Orisha is really present, it's powerful, and it tends to be more long lasting and permanent. Right? But I can't tell Obatala or Shango or Yemoja or Lokun, hey, sorry, it's winter here. I can say, go easy on me, all right? Like let me work around, right?
Yeah.
Because Ifa says in the Odu Okana Rosso, in the land that you go, do what you see. In other words, Ifa is adaptable. But
Yes.
adapting is one thing, stopping or crossing your arms is a completely other thing, right? The other thing is about ancestors. Yes, there are ancestors in the bloodline that are not, sweethearts, right? But what we have to understand that Ifa doesn't believe in all good and all bad. Ifa looks at the duality and equilibrium, right, of light and dark. Ide, Ibi, Ide, Ayewu are the yin and yang of nature. When one element or one force is more prevalent than the other, doesn't mean that you cannot come out of a situation well, whether you're in Ayewo, Ibi, or in Osobbo, but you do Ebbo, and the idea is always to bring things back into balance. And even the most twisted and difficult ancestor we have may serve a purpose. Even the most twisted and all that, if you know what that purpose is, and if you, without prejudice, without anger, without revenge, if you follow what Ifa, or in our practice, what Ifa says or Orisha say that needs to be done, or a spirit says needs to be done with that spirit in order to bring balance, not revenge, but balance and equilibrium. Because as much as people would like to say, oh, that is my relative, but that's not really my relative. Many times I tell people, if you have, even in living situation, you have children, and let's say you don't like your ex too much, and you say, oh, I want, that guy is such a bad, or that woman is such a bad, I want to do this. And I said, nope, because you have a child. And what you have to see is listen to what the Spirit says. Listen to what Ifa says is the lesson, or what is important to bring things back into equilibrium. And equilibrium is not a petty vendetta or get even, because unfortunately, every action has an equal opposite reaction quite often, and there's a balance. So if you do something negative, you have to prepare and do a lot of both so that the blowback doesn't cause other issues. So that's why it's always important to, again, it's not convenient, it's not at our whim, at our time, but that is the honesty and the integrity of the practitioner to do what spirit says, not what we want to do.
It's that noblesse oblige. To whom much is given, much is required, and that requires that we be in that moment where we recognize that that life can have a tendency to be bipolar, and that our perceptions, particularly, can be what's bipolar, and when the pendulum is too far to this side, the solution sometimes means that it momentarily swings too much to this side so that it'll find its equilibrium. I want to thank you guys so much. Annette has another important comment here. I love how those ancient traditions don't have the dogma and actually flex for the people involved. Yeah, absolutely right on, Ashe. I'll kind of close us out before I let each one of the three of you share a final thought with us, because this hour has flown by. Just let me say thank you to you so very much for generosity which you shared. And I at the end of every show, I try to see what my takeaway is, and I keep remembering something that one of my mentors taught me, and he said, we need to be more like the ant. And the ant spends all winter thinking about the coming summer, and spends all summer preparing for the coming winter, and that's where we get into the simpatico, the being in harmony with nature. And that knowing that not only in the fall are we preparing for the winter months, but also understanding that in our lives, that the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, as within, so without. In our lives, winter always follows summer, but summer and spring always follows winter. So when things are tough for us, that pendulum might have swung a little bit to the side, to one side, but it will find its equilibrium as long as we're open to the path, as long as we are respectful and seek the assistance and the allies that are there waiting for us at this time of year, remembering that these are allies or ancestors, not just of blood, but of place and of tribe, and the ancient ones. So I thank you all. We'll go ahead and I'll have Teresa start us off with any last thoughts, then Jean-Jerome, and then Andrea, you'll take us out for the show.
Perfect.
I just want to say that I think it's important, exactly like what Jean-Jerome said, any time that an equilibrium needs to be met because of outside circumstances that occur in our own individual lives, of course. I think it's also very important for me personally to observe my ancestral roots at this time of year and all throughout the year, and understand how that works, and how that works within me and how that works externally. As Jean-Jerome said, we all come with a group of spirits who decide to work with us, and it's us recognizing those spirits and working with them to make your own life, like in my case, to make my own life better and to fulfill my destiny, which is what I needed to do. And I think part of that destiny is being part of Ancestral Eyes. So I thank Jean-Jerome and I thank you as our hosts for allowing us to speak and give our opinions on things. So thank you.
And the addresses are down below so that you can tune into the Ancestral Eyes podcast and to their Facebook group. And please do that. And Jean-Jerome, as you wrap us up, let us know if there are any particular guests who's coming up on the show.
Absolutely. Actually, I'll let Teresa say that. So this week we have a good friend of Teresa who is in Midland, Melissa Cabot van Leuven. And we'll be visiting. Teresa will actually be visiting with her at her Wand and Cauldron, and she's a Cabot witch, and really somebody very honest and sincere in her practice and in the craft, and who has a strong ancestral veneration, root in her, and a very nice lady, very helpful. And I just first of all, I wanted to thank both of you, Jamichael and Andrea, for your kindness in inviting us to your show. I'm
Yes.
glad and I'm very happy that this type of reunion, this type of sacred space of respectfully coming together with compassion, with understanding, with respect, hopefully more and more podcasts and people and groups can come together and follow that example. Because at the end of the day, what we want is that the general population, the general mind share has a deeper understanding and respect for our traditions and for our journey, because there's a great value and blessing that is encapsulated in that, if it's allowed to, like a flower, like a seed that germinates and basically produces great fruit and great flowers. Just two things. Annette mentioned something about dogma. One thing about Ifa Orisha, most of our traditions, that they shouldn't be dogmatic. They are a constant communication, a constant symbiotic relationship with nature and the spirit world. So in the contrary, when Ifa gets dogmatic, that's when that's when you have to start going in the other direction. Listen, no, this is not right. Wait.
That's another story.
Absolutely. But again, as Jean-Michael said, it is really the aspect in everything of that constant cycle of yin and yang, of balance. When, one thing, and the seasons, the turn of the season, when one leads to the other. And understanding that it is really, any of these crafts really respect Mother Earth, respect the spirit world. Everything is cyclical. Even the concept of reincarnation, which is a topic for another show, of Atunwa in Yorùbá, that constant cycle of reincarnation, of return, is something which is cyclical, right? So lots of material for another show, Joe Michael.
Yeah, good point.
Andrea, take us out.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who was here tonight. It was or this morning. It was a beautiful, beautiful conversation. And for me, kind of touching a bit of what all of you have said, it reminds me very much of a tradition that we have in Persian culture, where we celebrate the winter solstice by staying up all night together. It's called Yalda. And we feast and we tell stories about ancestors. We tell stories. We read poetry. We bring in art and life into a space, and we share our food and we share our art and all of the things that bring light into the world in a dark time. And I feel like we're moving into a time that's going to be transformational for our world and for our communities. And I feel like your show is basically like having Yalda every Friday. So because we all can't get together right now because there's a pandemic, we're doing this in the way that we have, which is by having these wonderful conversations and podcasts from different corners of the world. And I feel like by doing that, we are really sharing spirit in a very beautiful and connecting way. So thank you. And I hope everyone tunes in for Friday night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. I apologize for keeping you over. I know I promised I would keep it to an hour. We hope you will come back for another discussion another time.
Anytime.
Look forward to this conversation.
Anytime.
Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments. We will watch the comment threads and try and keep up with any questions you might have if you're watching this on the replay. And until we get together next, I encourage you, as we do at the end of every show, to stay in the moment, because that's where the power is. To fill that moment with gratitude for the gifts that you have now, for the ancestors, for the allies and the old ones who work with us, and to always remember the best is yet to come. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, guys. Love and appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions,
calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
with absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life
to refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain,
to act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest,
to impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody,
and to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies,
is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately,
and that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women to restore compassion
to the center of morality and religion,
to return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of Scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information
about other traditions, religions, and cultures.
To encourage a positive appreciation of cultural
and religious diversity.
To cultivate
an informed empathy
with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.